Okay, we're going to start on Chapter 3 of Unit 1, and this is how Texas operates within the federal government. And this is a pretty interesting little thought question for you. Can Texas be its own country again? Well, we learned from our last set of lectures in Chapter 2 that, well, Texas really struggled as its own country, the Republic of Texas. We had a hostile neighbor to the south in Mexico. We had really odd dealings with the United States because of the slavery, non-slavery issue. Plus, it was really difficult for us to establish relationships with other countries. If you go to Austin today, you'll see the French legation right east of the capital. France was the only major country that established diplomatic relations with Texas. So it was really a big struggle. We would have the same struggles today. We could be our own country. We've got plenty of resources, a seaboard, a large border. But here's the thing, Texas operates big within the federal system. The federal system pays for all of our airports, our defense and security at the border, the military bases all throughout the state. The federal government leases a lot of land in Texas, not just for military, but for crops, experimentation as far as weapons, aircraft, etc. We've got NASA up in Houston. So you have to ask yourself, how would we pay for all those things if we became, again, our own country? It would be very difficult. Our taxes would obviously go up. It would be a struggle to compete with the rest of the country. So for now, if you like your quality of life at present, you might want to consider just staying right with the good old United States. So with the United States, remember we have the United States Constitution, and as I mentioned in the previous lecture, that governs all 50 states and 6 territories. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all the federal laws that it contains are applicable to all 50 states and 6 territories. But here's what happens. The states, through their own legislatures, get to decide how they want to interact with the federal government. And that's called states' rights. That's been very important to the states since even the colonial times, that states be able to interact with the federal government in a way that benefits their own culture, their own economy of that particular state. So here's an easy example to explain this concept. Let's look at the Second Amendment, something near and dear to all Americans and especially Texans. Your right to bear arms. Okay, the Second Amendment says you have the right to bear arms, and that's applicable to all 50 states and 6 territories. But each state interacts with the Second Amendment differently, depending on what their legislature wants in voting in majority for how to interact. How available are guns and ammunition going to be within that state? For example, we know in Texas we have some of the most liberal meaning a lot, not the political term liberal. We have a lot of guns in Texas. And we do a pretty good job with it for the most part. It's easy to get ammunition, easy to get a concealed weapons permit, no limits really. But if you go to New York State, very different interaction with the Second Amendment. Very difficult to get concealed weapons permits, limits on ammunition, very difficult to get a handgun permit. And that's not because the people in New York State are anti-gun or anti-Second Amendment. It's because in majority, their state legislature, who represents the communities of interest around New York State, have decided that it's in the best interest of public safety for how that state is structured to have this additional limitation as that relates to ammunition, handguns, all kinds of other different limitations on the interaction with the Second Amendment. Most of this has to do with the fact that you've got this large concentration of people in the New York metropolitan area. And when you have that many people concentrated in that small of an area, you really tend to go, the police will recommend this as well too, you really want to limit the amount of concealed weapons and handguns. So that's not one politician, that's not one political party, that's the legislature of New York State saying, here's what we're doing as it relates to public safety concerns in our state. We don't have those concerns in Texas. Even our large cities like Dallas, Houston, Austin now, San Antonio are spread out. There's lots of places for people to build and move. You don't really see that if you are in downtown Manhattan. You see a lot of people crunched in on top of each other. This government structure is called federalism. This is where you have a strong central government, that would be our federal government, that recognizes regional governments. And those regional governments are the states. So in the example I gave you with the Second Amendment, what you see is the states can pass their own laws as that relates to the Second Amendment. But no state can pass a law that opposes the Second Amendment, meaning no state can pass a law that says we're banning your guns. On April 15th of 2020, you have to go to the football stadium in your town and hand over your guns. And if they're expensive enough, we'll buy them back. No state can do that because you have the right to bear arms. So we have to understand how we interact with the federal government, and different states are going to interact differently depending on what their state believes that it needs as far as public policy is concerned. So this is the main concept that you need to get from Chapter 3. How do we interact with the federal government? The easy way to explain that is federalism. We have a strong central government that recognizes regional governments. Now, when there's a federal law that has been passed that states disagree with, there is an amendment to the Constitution, the 10th Amendment, that allows states to push back, saying, hey, you've gone too far. This is something that we can't do. States have won. States have been able to overturn federal law if they can prove through the federal court process that the federal government has passed a law that places an undue burden upon them. So focus on that concept in your chapter as well. All right, so that concludes the mini lecture for Chapter 3. Get started reading, and we'll move on to the Civic Health Index.